So this month's podcast was inspired by a really fantastic film that I had the opportunity to watch and had some connectivity to because as some may know, I live and work in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I've become very close over the years to a developer here in town named Daryl Calfee, and Daryl is an incredible developer, particularly for those in creative fields, because Daryl is very oriented to what his development projects mean to the wider community and how it intersects with that community. And so Daryl became one of a few subjects of a new film that you can stream, and we'll talk quite a bit more about that. I was able to access it on Amazon, very affordable, Slice of Life. And he was featured because Daryl has, with his partner Jesus in his company, they took on a old Pizza Hut and have converted it into a taqueria called Taco Jesus. And this reuse of a Pizza Hut apparently is not uncommon. Or at least there are certainly other examples of these buildings that have moved across the United States over the decades, have been, as the business model for Pizza Hut has changed, a lot of these buildings became empty and then turned back over. So in seeing this film, I was really inspired, and I wanted to have the opportunity, because I got a chance to meet the filmmakers when they were here in town. And I thought this would be a great opportunity because the film is not just about, I think in many ways the film is about America. And it's not just about America. It's also about making art about it, I think, in many ways. The artists are capturing the reimagination of space and identity across diverse communities, and many of those communities happen to be small ones. And we'll talk a little bit about, I'm sure, each of these communities as we go through. But our guests are Australian-born filmmakers, Matthew Salleh and Rose Tucker. And they turned a nostalgia, well, they take a look at a nostalgic building type, former Pizza Huts, and use this as an examination of our country here. And from LGBTQ plus churches to cannabis dispensaries, each space becomes a stage for reinvention. And today we'll explore how they found that story, what it means for small towns, and what creative reuse looks like in practice. So, Matthew and Rose, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, lovely to talk with you.
Well, I think to get started, share with me a little bit about what led you to former Pizza Huts as the narrative vehicle, and why across so many communities.
For sure. Well, we grew up with Pizza Huts in Australia, and they were the same. We had the same buildings, the same menus. So it's a very sort of nostalgic part of our upbringing. And then we moved to the US about 8 years ago, and we've sort of always been aware of this meme of the former Pizza Hut. They pop up online all the time, and it's usually just kind of a funny joke. And we thought, what better way to maybe do a bit of a deeper dive into these stories across the US. And I know, Matt, you've always had this idea of like doing a film with the outsider eye.
Yeah, for us, it was also, we moved here 8 years ago, and so we're still very fresh and new to the country. But we've also been here 8 years, so we know a little bit of the conversations
Hmm.
that are going on,
Yeah.
and so we had this sort of vision of story we wanted to tell. We sort of call it our sort of Great American Road Trip in documentary form. And
Yeah.
I'm very inspired by films like there's an 80s film called Paris, Texas, which was a German filmmaker, Wim Wenders, who came and told a story of Middle America, but he had this what I call this outsider eye, and so he sort of saw very ordinary things in very special ways. And so we thought that now was the time to strike where we could, while we still have a little bit of that outsider eye, so that when we come into a community, we're seeing things sort of fresh and maybe with a little bit of a different angle from time to time as well.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think that really stands out in the film, and I think I think we, and maybe this isn't fair across the board, but I do think a lot of the way that America breaks up, is across, what we would call smaller communities, rural communities, and
Mhm.
urban centers, and how the two view each other, right, is in many ways been kind of, you know, codified in this way
Sure.
from media influences and what we hear and see and how and I do think what was really clear was I don't know, there was a beauty in each of these communities, that we could see and see through the lens that you were looking through, and that, being somebody who originally is from a small town and works with people in small communities, there is a beauty in all these communities, and so I think that was really, really evident. And Matt, because you brought it up, one thing I will share, is that there's a rural arts management book that I've referenced at points, written by Elise Kiefer and Jerome Sokoloff, and they bring up this notion of the outsider versus the insider in small communities, right? And that as artists, identifying which one you are is really important in creating work. You can be either, but you need to know what you are, right, to effectively connect to the community. So you all, clearly were outsiders, right? Clearly outsiders coming into these communities. I'm kind of curious how you mentioned that you had Pizza Huts in Australia, so you had some, obviously had pop cultural experience with it. But how did your Australian origins inform your view of these repurposed American spaces? Because there is
Yeah.
something too like very American about each of these communities and each of these
Yeah,
reuses.
absolutely. And I think for us, like we try to use that outsiderness as an asset because for me, documentary filmmaking is all about curiosity, and what makes us so curious to find other people's stories is the fact that we know so little and we're here to learn so much. So for us, being able to sort of jump in and sort of learn about what these buildings meant to these communities, we had our own, version of what we thought it would be, but we try really hard when we make our films to not have too many preconceived notions. And we're very lucky. We're sort of self-funded independent filmmakers. We make our films with just the two of us as the entire crew, which gives us this flexibility to go in, find a
Oh
story,
yeah.
take our time. If things go in a different direction, they go in a different direction. And so just keeping that curiosity. And then I think on the other side, you also have that reflected where because we were outsiders, people would talk to us like,
Mm.
oh, have you heard about the way things work? And we're like, well, no, go
Oh
on. And so it sort of
yeah.
made it a bit easier because it meant that people, when they wanted to discuss their lives and their dreams and their perspectives, that they weren't assuming we were worn into these preconceived notions that
I
maybe if we
love
were
that.
American filmmakers we would have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if we were going to people as, filmmakers from New York, in quotes, we
Yeah.
might have got a different
Then
attitude
we're
than
filmmakers from New York.
filmmakers,
Yeah.
yeah, than
Yeah, yeah,
filmmakers
which
from
they are.
Australia.
Yeah. Yeah, that is really interesting. And I've found, there is so much pride that exists in small communities across America, and people
Mhm.
do want to share their story. And it's one of the most powerful angles and approaches for artists in small communities is to harness that. People really do want their story told, and they want to share the story, and they're proud of where they're from, and that really comes through. If you all wouldn't mind, I want to encourage people to watch the film, and because you really should, and so I don't want to give too much away in regards to the film, but if you all wouldn't mind sort of running through all the different types of reuse that you came across, just for context for the listener about what
Sure.
you found.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we started with a short list of hundreds, if not thousands, of potential former Pizza Huts to star in this film. And it took a long time to sort of whittle it down to the ones that are featured. We decided to go with the most sort of out there or unique examples. So you mentioned the LGBTQ church in Florida, the cannabis dispensary. Turns out there's actually a few cannabis dispensaries in former Pizza Huts. It's a bit of a niche thing now.
Yeah.
Same,
Which,
same,
by the way, I just
same,
want to tell the audience
same.
really quick, the name of the dispensary too is called Bud Hut, which I
That's
thought was
right.
like
So
absolutely
good. So
hilarious.
good. Walsenburg, Colorado. That was probably the most rural location we filmed in.
Yeah, yeah.
We have a karaoke bar in Fort Worth, Texas, an amazing seafood restaurant in Charleston, a barbecue joint just north of Chicago, and of course Taco Jesus.
Tucker, who's the
Okay,
Virginia.
and
Jesus. Yeah.
it was really interesting because we started filming this film in early 2023, and then we actually ended up filming with Taco Jesus last. And it was interesting because we'd sort of assembled the film, filmed with everybody, but at the time, Taco Jesus didn't even exist as a business. That's how newly minted they were.
Yeah.
And it was actually, we were really missing this piece of the puzzle. You know, once you're editing a film, it's all about joining these puzzle pieces together. And then Rose read about Taco Jesus.
I saw a news article
Yeah.
with Rudy and Jesus, and I saw this beautiful, colorful building, and I'm like, wow, that's the one.
Yeah.
They've got to be
Yeah.
in the movie.
But in terms of sort of whittling it down, as it were, you know, because we're independent filmmakers, we decided to sort of we decided we'd talk to people before heading down there. And that was sort of where we just, you know, discovered whether the film even had legs was, oh, there's all these interesting buildings, but what are the stories behind those buildings? Like Rose said, every now and again you'll be on the internet and there'll be a funny meme about, look at what these old Pizza Huts have been turned into. But for us, it was really about, well, who converted that building? What were their dreams? Was their dream to do it in an old Pizza Hut, or is that sort of like,
Yeah.
you know, making the best with what you've
I
got?
mean, some of these buildings are living their second life much longer than they were ever a Pizza Hut. Like the church has been around for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
Similarly, Yup's
Okay.
Karaoke Bar, I think, is 30 odd years
Okay.
old. So some of them have spent much longer in their second or third or fourth lives than they were, yeah, ever as a Pizza Hut.
Yeah,
I
but
love
it was
that.
just a thing where we basically started chatting to people, and that was really our first, I guess, bounce board for whether this idea had legs. Was we actually rang up the church first and told them our idea, and they, you know, one of the things that got to me straight away, and you said this about people wanting to tell their stories, is everyone was very passionate about wanting to tell their stories, but also understood sort of the humor of the project as well. Like they thought it was, you know, one of the things that I loved about this film was how much of a great sense of humor people had about it. Like found the story very, very funny because I think the thing about our films is that they are often funny on the surface of it, and then you know we as we dive deeper and deeper, we find these more profound stories. And I think everyone was very in on that.
In on the joke. I mean, the church nicknames themselves the Church of the Pepperoni. Like they get it.
But straight away talking to them and sort of hearing about the challenges they've had in running that church and you know some of the other stuff, that it was just this really powerful story. And so when we said we wanted to come down, they were like, yeah, come on down. And so you know we were very lucky because we have that versatility where we just sort of hopped on the next plane, and before you knew it, the two of us were there, you know, capturing the story.
I love it. I had this really interesting moment before the screening here in Lynchburg where I was introducing Daryl to another active community member. He's the in political circles, he's essentially the chair of the Democratic Party here.
Hmm.
And they were talking about a different set of developments that Daryl was working on. And in that conversation, there was, I would say, I'm not going to call it an argument, but there was a
Hmm.
bit of a conversation around gentrification.
Hmm.
And and I and you know what was great about the film was at least the portion of Daryl and Jesus's story was it really disarmed the argument. And I actually think it's a really complex. I think it's really complex, and I think it's really difficult subject matter. But I do think that when we see the opportunity, right, that was provided Jesus's family, and this is something that runs through, I thought, through a lot of the stories of opportunity that existed in the abandonment of these buildings, whether that be a group of LGBTQ plus Christians who needed a home,
Hmm.
to a barbecue chef who needed. I mean, it really is. I think the opportunity that exists in some of these abandoned spaces, and in a lot of small communities, there are a lot of abandoned spaces.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm kind of curious too, you filmed in multiple states, Florida, Texas, Colorado, Illinois, Virginia. Um, how did each community kind of reflect itself through its reuse? I mean, it's a bit of a broad question, but I'm kind of curious how you saw those. And they don't have, I know that some of these communities maybe aren't technically small towns, but when people see the film, they kind of are though, right? Like even at least these sections of town that they're in or the communities that they are serving, right, are small in themselves.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
Pizza Hut's is a chain of suburbia and small towns. Like you're not going to find a dine-in Pizza Hut in the center of New York City. Like they just didn't exist.
No, no.
I think in terms of the communities we were filming with, each one felt small, like a small community, because I think a lot of the places we chose to film did represent like minority communities, whether that be, you know, an LGBTQ community in Boynton Beach, Florida, or, you know, a cannabis dispensary in Colorado. These are all sort of niche communities. And yeah, I think that's sort of reflected in the film.
Yeah, I think something that's, you know, really interesting is to me this idea of the third place. And you know, this idea that there's a
Yeah.
place of work, a place of family, home, and then this third place, these community spaces. And you know, you know, coming out of making this film out of COVID, where those places had to be closed down for a couple of years, you know, it made us reflect a lot on like, well, what are these places and what do they mean to communities? And I think even if every community was a little bit different, the people we were filming with were people that were basically putting in the hard work to get these third places going. And one of the things I've always said is that keeping community spaces alive, whether they're sort of more run by governments and councils or whether they are private enterprise, keeping a third place alive is hard work. And
Yeah.
it takes a lot
Yeah.
of dedication and a lot of risk taking and a lot of like sort of just gambling that it will, you know, hoping that it will kind of work. And I think for something common about all the people that we filmed in our film was that they sort of took a chance on the community. If we build this,
Oh, I
you know,
love
it's a bit
that.
of a field of dreams, build it and they will come kind of moment. And I
Yeah.
think for me, I was quite inspired by, you know, people taking that gamble on their community, that if we build this space, be it whether it's a seafood restaurant or whether it's a church or whatever it is, that people will sort of be part of that community. And I think for a lot of people that we filmed with, it was because they'd already been a part of that community. A lot of them remember for a long time, a lot of them remember when it was a Pizza Hut. One of the things I found really interesting was that, you know, it sounds a bit silly, but a lot of small towns, the old Pizza Hut buildings are a source of pride. You know, we sort of think of them as these big, just a big giant corporation and a big franchise. But you know, to cast your mind back to say the 1970s, where your town was selected to get a Pizza
Yeah, the
Hut,
Pizza
not the
Hut. Yeah.
town one over, not the town two,
Yeah.
but you guys had the Pizza Hut. And you know, back when big restaurants were a less common thing. You know, one book that we used as a really great reference point for this was a book by Phil Langford, who we actually interview in the film, called Orange Roofs. I'm just looking at it.
Orange Roof's Golden
There we go.
Arches.
And that book basically traced the role of, from an architectural point of view, of like what chain stores did to the American landscape, how they changed the built landscape, but how they became such a reliable and important part of that landscape. And you know, now we're in that next phase where a lot of them are getting abandoned and turned
Yeah.
into other things.
And I'll say that the vast majority of throughout our research, the vast majority are immigrant-run restaurants. So Mexican restaurants, I think,
Interesting.
is number one on the list, but the
Yeah.
vast majority are family-run immigrant food restaurants, which is really, really awesome. Like, yeah, some pretty amazing food out there. So it's kind of funny to think of these, like, you know, something that was just doling out pizza might be down, you know, serving beautiful Nepalese food.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to your point too, the sort of reflection of the American landscape, right? When we think about, you know, right, the urban sprawl and
Mhm.
suburbia and your town getting one of these, and
Mhm.
now, right, a very diverse country, right, with a large immigrant population. It's still this major reflection of who we are.
Yeah.
I really love that.
And something that was really interesting for us is this is what we thought would be the entire focus of the film. Partway through our research, we learned that Wichita State University actually has the original Pizza Hut building on campus. And so when we went and so we went down to it's now the Pizza Hut Museum.
Museum, yeah.
So, yeah, so we went down there to Wichita. I love. There's something about the town of Wichita, Kansas, because I believe if you try to balance America on your finger, you basically land on Wichita. It's about as dead center as you can get.
For those that don't know, I didn't know the Pizza Hut backstory when we started researching this film, but Pizza Hut started in Wichita, Kansas. It was two brothers, 1958. They dropped out of college, borrowed $500 from their mum to start Pizza Hut. And like, they are like the true like American success story. They were not Italian. They'd never eaten pizza. Pizza was not a thing in the middle of the country in that part, you know, in that period of time. So yeah, these guys just like had this idea. They're like, let's give it a go, and you know, within a few years, it completely took off.
And to me, so when we made the film, we got the opportunity to meet with Dan Carney, who founded Pizza Hut. You know, he's 91 91. It was 91 when we filmed with him, and going strong. And
He's still in Wichita.
he's still in Wichita. And for me, it was really interesting because, like in a way, he encapsulates that big side of the American dream. Sometimes I joke like, what is the American dream? It's to start a business and then sell it to Pepsi for $1 billion.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
that's one version of the American dream. But it's that idea of like, there's kind of no limits to how big you can think when you have that entrepreneurial spark in America. And that was very, like we also came from Australia, moved to America, started our own business. We saw ourselves as entrepreneurs. We've always been this sort of self-run production company. And so to see that, like the biggest version of the American dream come true, and then see people just starting in their journey, or people halfway,
That
Heath
is,
and Daryl had just started the restaurant and Rudy about like 3 months before we came by. So
yes,
that's about,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's one of the things I love about the film is the parallel
Mm.
of the Pizza Hut origin story, and then all of these individual places. It's really one of the powers of the film, and I would say, for anybody in small communities, one of the things is really, I think, important to recognize if you're going to be able to maximize resources, connect to a community, create a viable third space, is to kind of understand the trajectory of America and small towns too. How,
Mhm.
what the scale, what it looks like, what's possible now, what isn't possible now. But at its core, right, entrepreneurship, just as a human,
Mm.
component of our spirit, and certainly in America, a big part of our identity, seeing that come through in each of these places and in different ways,
Mm.
in
Oh
very
yeah.
different ways.
And the challenges of doing it today is it's a lot harder today than it was in 1958.
Yeah,
So I think
yeah.
Big Ed's story exemplifies that best. Going into tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and losing their house, and having to start from scratch. It's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, and I think it's also a thing where Dan Carney, the founder of Pizza Hut, said it himself. It's a spark that just some people have. Like it's almost, like, and he was like, my dad always taught me, like they came from Wichita where everyone worked for major companies like Boeing, or something, or Motorola or something like that. And so there's that spark there of just like got to do it ourselves, don't know how. And that's something, like our parents ran their own businesses. My dad had a very similar story to Big Ed of quitting corporate Australia to start up his own business. So those are very inspirational stories to us. And in terms of, like you said, that coming into the community and telling that story, feeling like we were like, even this film itself is our little entrepreneurial little project as well.
Yeah,
So
there's
it's
another
sort of,
mirror.
it's all very reflective the whole way through.
Well, and you could feel that. You could feel that it meant something to you all, and it spoke to you. You're visiting multiple communities, and I think this is an important question maybe to ask of artists when we're thinking about relationship to a community, that becomes the subject matter of artwork. How did you ensure that each story was portrayed with sensitivity and depth?
I
Yeah.
think the main thing is we're not in the film. So everybody
Yeah,
speaks in their own words. You don't hear our voice, you don't see us. So it's not like a presenter-led show where we come in giving our opinions and
yeah,
our thoughts. Everyone is telling their own story. I think that's a really big part of it.
Yeah, and I think to go back to what I was saying earlier, it's also just a little bit about the way we work, being, independent, self-finance. We've done it various ways over the years, and a lot of bigger projects, a lot of bigger documentaries. You do a pitch and you tell people what you're going to make, and people want to know straight away. Uh, uh, what's the movie about? And we're often like, oh, we don't know. Like, we don't know yet. We have an idea. Well, wouldn't it be cool if it goes down this way or that way? That's some compare. You think about what the story
yeah.
might be. But we had this opportunity to go where the story took us. And that meant that I think we were never fighting against like, oh, but we said the brief said we were going to go do this. And so then I think that freedom allowed us to sort of more faithfully tell the story. I think it's the way we've always worked.
Yeah, and the
So
way we work is very observational. So we'll do these in-depth sit-down interviews, people telling their own story. But then the observational footage we shot is purely that. We're fly on the wall. We're not setting up scenarios, that kind of thing, which
Okay.
some, like, yeah, your big Netflix documentaries probably handle it slightly differently to try and generate additional drama, that kind of thing. But that's not we're very old school. It's just that we're just a crew of two. Matt shoots the camera, I'm holding the boom, recording the sound, and we just step back and let things happen. That's how we like to work.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things too, I just was thinking about in some of the shots, I was thinking about, and I think this is maybe important to share too, because, and Matt, you brought this up earlier, how difficult it is to formulate and maintain these third spaces. It's so hard. And one thing that I appreciated in the film too that comes through, I do think there is a real spirit of optimism and support that's going on in the film, but you could feel the stress and the
Mhm.
strain underneath it. And it
Mhm.
shows up in interesting ways. And this is just me just kind of geeking out and sharing this with you for a moment. But there were even shots where like we're at Bud Hut or something and the parking lot is empty.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it wasn't always. I mean, there's shots where it's not, and there's certainly people moving in and out of it,
Yeah.
and it's not. But not being afraid to kind of show, and how sparse it feels in this landscape that is. My family's from Colorado, but they're
Yeah.
from Western Colorado, right? They're the
Mhm.
mountain people,
Yeah.
Mm.
and one of the individuals you interview talks about the difference in
Yeah.
Colorado,
Yes.
right, between the Western
Yep.
and the Eastern. And it's really, really true. And that Eastern section, people don't think of Colorado in the terms of the Eastern section of Colorado, which is open plains,
Yeah.
Yep.
it's big and open. And this Pizza Hut or old Pizza Hut just sitting in the middle
Yep.
of like nothing,
Yeah.
except for mountains off in the distance. And so there is still, I think, a real reality that's depicted. Or I would imagine it didn't come up directly. I don't remember it coming up directly, but it's church going is hard to maintain right now
Mhm.
with people, and I still had a sense in the honesty of the insecurity that kind of still exists. The barbecue story in Illinois also too is just, I think, a really I I'm going off on a tangent here, but I saw also this parallel between when I was talking about the gentrification moment. There there was also a parallel moment when the barbecue owner speaks to the developer who helped him.
Mhm.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, that's Daryl Calfee. Like, I thought, like that's that community's Daryl Calfee. Like there's a Daryl Calfee out there, and they are there. And sometimes, you need help to get through what is difficult
Yeah.
to do.
And I think it's like you said, the question of gentrification or development in small towns is a difficult question. We've traveled a lot of America with this and other films, and you see, America, a lot of American towns are really caught in that boom bust cycle, and we've seen them at like all different parts of that cycle.
Yeah.
And
And
we live in Brooklyn, the heart of gentrification. Like,
Oh, yeah. Well, you're in Park Slope, right? Too.
yeah,
yeah,
exactly,
well,
exactly.
we like to say at least Park Slope gentrified a long
Well,
time
right.
ago.
But so it brings up lots of these difficult questions. But I think in terms of like the idea of businesses and people that want to start up businesses and give back into their own community, it's that old adage that it takes a village. And whether that is the customers coming through, people supporting, conducive councils, which they not always are,
Yeah.
and also just this yeah, I think it's a big one for me is just like how unconventional these places can be. You might not even realize as you're built. I don't think necessarily people that started these businesses in former Pizza Huts were like, oh, I want to build a third place so that I can inject a sense of traditional community back into my environment. That's something that I think was heartfelt by all of them, but it sort of came through business. It came through
Yeah.
I'm good at, Big Ed was like, I love cooking. I want to cook for people. I'm tired of corporate America. I want to start my own thing. I think when a lot of people start their own business, they're not quite sure what they're even doing. I know when we start, we had this passion for film. We wanted to start up a little film company, which we did in Australia like 20 years ago. And, we had absolutely no idea.
I mean, just like Big Ed, we went into debt right off the bat to a very angry Italian landlord. And then we're like, oh, okay, we actually need to learn how to make some money so this business can survive. Oh, okay, we're not just going to get away with not paying rent. All right,
Yeah.
let's do
Yeah.
some corporate work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it really is. I think, that struggle and the relationship to the struggle. I think at the end of the day, though, right, what it depicts, though, is that depi- de- despite the struggles that exist or the realities, right, that people end up facing, I think I really encourage folks to see it too, particularly if you're in a smaller community trying to make it work. Um, m- the sense I get or the feeling I got is, hey, you know what? It's worth it, and it's worth it when you remember it for these reasons. And sometimes when you're inside something, you're in the middle of it, it's hard
Hmm.
to remember
Hmm.
why you're doing it, why it means something. And I think as outside artists coming in and framing it for us and looking at it, we can see, oh, that's why, right? This is a reminder of why it's important. And I think even just as a refuel or re-inspiration for folks in a moment where they may be struggling and facing, an angry Italian man who wants your money, that that it is, it is worth doing, and you see the rewards. I mean, I think about, even Big Ed's family.
Hmm.
There's just a lot of things in the film, that move just beyond the individuals too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and oh,
speaking of Big Eds, so the amazing news is that since we finished filming with them, they have become so successful that they've actually had to move from the old Pizza Hut into a much bigger location.
which is the
Oh
next bit. So
man,
there, so for them, the Pizza Hut building is the middle of their journey, which
Yeah.
I quite like as
yeah,
well.
I
Yeah. So
love
they're in a
that.
place like, I don't know, 4 times the size now. They outgrew the Pizza Hut,
Ah,
which is amazing.
But
you're
just
gonna love Big Ed, everybody. That is
yeah.
awesome. That makes me so happy.
Yeah,
That makes me
it was a
so
lot of fun. We had the American premiere for this film at the Chicago Film Festival, and they're just north of Chicago, so they came down for the festival. So they saw themselves for the first time right up on the big screen, walked the red carpet. It was a lot of
Yeah.
fun. But just to go back a step and talk about that refueling, that's very much what these stories did for ourselves as well, because making an
Mm.
independent film is really tough, and
Mm.
you sort of get stuck in it for a long time, and you sometimes have bad days and you have good days with it. And yeah, I rely on the stories we tell to sort of give me that bit of fuel
Yeah,
as well.
can get down to the real nitty gritty stuff. Like I talked with some of the business owners about things like payroll software.
Oh,
Because
yeah, yeah,
it's sometimes like share, we don't talk to many other small business owners, so to be able to
yeah.
share some of that really boring
And
stuff can be
I
really
think
helpful.
one of the toughest things can be that sense of isolation, because one of the things we have to remember when we watch this film is we know that there's these old Pizza Huts that are being turned into different things as the viewer, but everyone was in their own community. They didn't realize necessarily that these other places existed. So,
Oh,
it was
cool.
very weird for us. We'd come into like the third or the fourth location we were filming at, and this idea of all these different dreams on the same floor plan, you know?
And it's funny,
Yeah, yeah.
another very practical thing, piece of knowledge we could bring to the table is that all of these buildings leak in exactly the same spot in the ceiling. So we could walk in and it's a great
It's a
conversation
great way to
starter.
establish
I
bonuses.
could point
Yeah,
at their
yeah.
ceiling. I'm like, does it leak right there? And they're like, it does.
That's so
How did
funny.
you know?
Yeah. So there's this sort of like the secret network of people who all have to deal with the same building, not necessarily aware that others are doing it. I think that's quite sort of
Mm,
magical, this idea of this sort of network of people doing it all together.
Yeah, and then also yeah, and not being alone,
Mm.
I think it can feel so isolating,
Hmm.
in entrepreneurial projects like that.
Hmm.
And then, compound it if you're in a smaller community.
Hmm.
I mean, again, the landscape in Colorado of Bud Hut, I think to know, like, okay, you are on this road in the middle of an open prairie,
Yeah.
right? But then in Virginia, there's another one. In Illinois, there's another one. I mean, just the Charleston.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's something, I don't know, really, and I think for people in small communities, particularly in the arts field, it can feel very isolating, and to know that you're
Mhm.
not alone is really beneficial. Along the logistics as an artist coming in the outside, um, were there any choices you had to make to respect community privacy or narrative authenticity? Just kind of thinking through to the respect and the navigation of being outsiders and coming into a community and
Yeah,
representing them.
it's definitely something we take really seriously, and something we're always learning with. And I think, like Rose said, by us not being in the film, and also by us not having this preconceived narrative we go in, that's about the most valuable.
And on a practical level, just letting people know what we were doing. So obviously we're filming in busy environments, often it's restaurants and things like that. So whether that be advance notice, like you know, they might put it on their Facebook page ahead of time, or signs on the door so people know on the way in that they might be filmed. It's little practical things like that. And we're not hiding, it's not hidden camera. We're right there, and we would introduce ourselves.
And we were very aware. We try, you know, we'd say have a couple of weeks to film in each place, and we would not film for the first day or two, you know, that sort of thing, just to get to learn the community. You know, I've heard stories before of some productions that will rush in, cameras rolling, and then get out as soon as you can. So we tried to sort of, even if it's only for a week, sort of be part of the community. I think.
Oh yeah, like we went to the karaoke bar for a couple of nights before we pulled out.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's an important thing for folks to hear too. You know, if you're an artist, an outsider coming in, you know, I do think that integration in a way before the actual work takes place.
Oh, absolutely. And like honestly, like having a meal with people or a drink at the bar, like and go like, no, like we want to be here. We're enjoying being here in your space. We want to talk to the regulars. Yeah. And it doesn't take long to get to know the regulars in any given place. Like you tend to get welcomed in pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think it's just that for us, it's a trust building exercise that we want to go through anyway. But because it just makes it easier to work. You know, the phrase I always say is that, you know, documentary filmmaking is described as you know, being a fly on the wall, but flies on walls are very annoying. You know what I mean? Like, so we want to make sure we're not, and we probably something a bit different for this as opposed to other projects is we were going into working businesses, wanting to be that fly on the wall and wanting to observe businesses, but we didn't want to affect their business. You know what I mean? Like, so we didn't, you know, like I know probably some bigger productions will be like, oh, we'll close down for 3 days so that we can just film. But for us, we wanted to get that liveliness of the business at full operation. So that meant that you know, like that was, oh, it's a bit of a quiet night. Well, you know, that was probably the biggest stressor for a lot of people we were filming with was like, oh, I don't know if we're going to have a big Thursday or a big Friday. And it's like, well, we'll just stay for both. Like, you know, we want you guys to like, you know, show us the version of the business you want. And so because, you know, like any business, you think you know which days are going to have the rush, but the rush comes when you least expect it. So
like the karaoke bar, we were all,
I was just about to ask that. Actually,
we were geared up thinking Friday night would be the big night, Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Tuesday night.
There was Tuesday night. It was like 100 degrees in Fort Worth, Texas, and we were sweating buckets, and everyone came in on that too. You just can't pick it. You can't pick it.
Yeah, and I love the depiction of it too, because you also see both. I mean, there are moments too where people are singing and the bar's kind of empty.
No, it's empty. Yeah, exactly.
And then there's other sequences where they're like, to your point, it's just like it is the place to be that night, right?
Oh yeah.
And everyone knows. Anyone who's run a business knows that you have your good days and your bad days.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, this idea of these kind of legacy structures. You know, communities are filled with these types of structures. It's funny. I had this realization while we were sitting here talking. Like our dispensary here in Lynchburg is in an old Applebee's.
Oh,
and
there you go.
Right. and this is that Applebee's too style architecture that is like what Pizza Hut's second generation kind of was, right? The you know,
they moved towards the boxy, the more 90s style.
Yeah. And now that too, right, is now right. These things running through cycles. So now our dispensary is in this old Applebee's by the Walmart, which always just like really cracks me up. But anyway, these structures exist, and you know, I'm trying to think, could this, you know, kind of site-based documentary inspire people in small towns to think differently about legacy structures, you know, repurposing that idea, you know, curious if you think that is a possibility from something like this.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think there's there's lots of something I think that it makes this very interesting. Well, is you kind of got to remember how recent America's modern history is. You know, if you go back to you can go to sort of older places like, you know, Istanbul or Rome, where you can see the 12th century building and then the 13th century building built on top, and then the 14th century building. These are the structures that built America. You know, rapid expansion in the 40s and 50s meant that these, you know, iconic, you know, I find it really interesting that, you know, you can talk about high architecture, but name me a more commonly recognizable building in an instant than one of these old Pizza Huts. And so these are what the landscape and the builtscape is made out of. And so for me, it's this kind of you know, I think it's probably something that's not massively studied or looked at the moment because it's so recent. But I think I think these will be the grand old buildings in 100 years'
Oh,
time.
I mean, I'd love it. I think but like, I think people need to study more about which ones can last long term. So, like, I know that a
Ah,
lot of buildings built during that era are maybe not going to last as long, but these old Pizza Huts are standing
they were
strong,
built to
like,
last. Yeah.
except for that
Yeah.
one leak.
Yeah, it was like Dina, the manager of Nico Seafood in
Yeah.
Charleston. She said this building has survived hurricanes. You know, it's almost
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms
Yeah.
of repurposing. It's also a bit of a game of survival of the fittest. Of like these buildings that are left are strong. You know what I mean? Which means
Yeah.
they've got
They're still there.
yeah,
Yeah. I
that's
mean,
right.
And they have
so
a unique, ironically now, a vintage look to them. And like me, I know, like, a lot of people complain about modern architecture all looking the same. Everything's just a plain grey box these days. So maybe that vintage charm will come back into fashion.
yeah, I love that. Well, and there's a couple of one of the things that just to point my audience towards is one of the stories that I return to often for the purposes of providing examples for folks in smaller communities is there's a friend of mine and fellow arts administrator who runs Sitka Fine Arts Camp, which is in Sitka, Alaska. And there was a college campus that was one of their primary economic drivers in the community. I mean, they are a stop-off spot for cruise ships and things that move up the coast of Alaska. But this college was a big part of the community, and it closed. And the success story of Roger, who runs Sitka Fine Arts Camps, the success story is that they were basically given the campus. They had been running a small camp or arts school essentially for largely in the summers for the state of Alaska, for students, middle school and high school students, and they got this college campus, and they ended up they have one building at a time, uh, repaired it and fixed it, and it has been a community-wide effort too. So this engagement that they've created across the community, that volunteerism isn't necessarily giving money. It could be that you show up one day, almost like a Habitat for Humanity scenario, and you're
Mhm.
helping fix the building. And so it's been this thing that's brought the community together in repairing and repurposing this. And then the narrative of the town flipped. It had been the narrative of the town where the college closed.
Ah,
And now it's the town that Sitka Fine Arts Camp is thriving in. It has been now recognized as the state, arts camp of, all these things. They've gotten these awards, and it keeps growing, and they keep adding, to the buildings that they keep fixing. And, we do have all of these, it can seem like nothing, but there is something really depressing about like an empty Pizza Hut building. And to your point, it is strong. It's going to stay there, right?
yeah.
And the symbolism of these empty spaces. And I think getting back to that gentrification conversation too, why it's really tough, because if you leave these things empty without being repurposed, then they become a blight, and not just visually, but also, I mean, how people feel about where they live.
Mhm.
And there's something really powerful. I don't know, there's something, even that green roof, right?
Mhm.
On that building in Bud Hut. I don't know, it's just, I don't know, there's a reinvention, there's a new spirit that is brought in.
Signs of life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's just a really, really powerful reminder. And we're here, at the Academy, we restored a historic theater that had been closed for 60 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And you talk about,
Was it completely dilapidated inside?
yeah, it looked like Stranger Things upside down world.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's so
and
cool.
huge project. It took a bunch of work, but it changed the narrative for the community about what was
Yeah.
possible. You
And
know,
I think you can look at different scales of it as well. One of the things that's been really fortunate for us is we've been able to sort of do our second tour because we did a big festival tour for this film,
mm,
and so we've screened at everything from brand new AMC's to just two. I think that can give the contrast is we screened at Cleveland Film Festival where they've got a huge arts district with a lot of perfectly restored
yeah, it's a
playhouse
great area.
where they had
Oh, they're
absolutely
beautiful.
phenomenal. And then we also did a screening in Pittsburgh at a place called
The
Bottle Rocket
Rocket
Social
Social
Hall, which was a bunch of young 20-something film makers basically started up this community space in an old 70s.
It was a 70s bar that was basically untouched. It was not unlike Yups in our film,
Yeah.
actually. So still with all the brown vinyl and like
Yeah.
orange carpet and like untouched. But now they host movie screenings, plays, stand-up comedy.
They're doing it, like they're like doing it day by day. And so to see, we've seen some of the, like the theater district in Cleveland is probably one of the largest sort of venues that I think we played in a 3,500 seat cinema. So, that's one end of it. And then this other one where we sold out and stacked out this bar. And I didn't know what was going to happen because we turned up, we only advertised it about a week beforehand, and it was cold.
It was like 20 degrees. It was freezing,
Yeah.
like proper freezing.
Yeah, and everyone turned up for that. So it is. I do feel like it's that old Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. They just built that because
Yeah.
they wanted a space to hang out. I think is pretty much the story.
And there
And
was
now
a
they turned it into.
hangar for like in Pittsburgh. They're a pretty unique venue, and now they're kind of like the preeminent spot for stand-up comics to come when they come through Pittsburgh. I'm like, yeah,
I love
so
it.
cool.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, I think if you could tell us where folks can screen the film, because I want to make sure as many people see this amazing film as possible.
Sure. You can screen it on Prime Video in most places, so all across America, Canada, England, Australia, all of that. Prime Video is usually the easiest stop. And then if not, sliceoflifedoc.com is our website where you can stream it directly, and there's a few other download options there.
And we did something really cool. We did a like collector's edition Blu-ray
Oh, yes.
series.
Oh.
So you could buy the 6 different versions, each one featuring a different former Pizza Hut.
So-
the contents are the same,
So
but the
pick your-
covers are
I'll
different.
Yeah,
show you
yeah.
quickly. This is the
Oh, we have the there we go.
of them here. So you've got your Taco Jesus
Yes.
limited edition, and then you've got your let's have a look here. There's your Big Ed's barbecue. So so we were all, even just part of this old retro charm is like I actually I did not go to film school. I basically learned film by working in a video store. It's about as cliche as you can get. So when I had the chance to do our own limited edition Blu-ray, we had to sort of jump.
You have to do it. You have
Yeah,
to
you
do
gotta
it.
do it. Yeah.
There may be a next film that's blockbusters, like old blockbusters.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there was a great documentary
There
about,
was one actually.
about the
Was there?
about the last one to close.
I think it was the last one to
Oh yes, the
Yeah.
last
Decline.
blockbuster on Earth
Yeah.
or whatever. Yes,
Yeah.
I totally
yeah,
know.
and that's a good double header. You can watch that film and
Yeah,
our film
yeah.
on the same night. That's
Yes.
a good one.
A
Yeah.
good double bill. Yeah.
The beginning and the end.
Yeah.
Well, just as a final note, what would be some advice and maybe actionable advice that you would leave? I'm going to say actually outside artists going into a community to tell its story.
Mm. I think take the time to talk to people. Like, don't be pulling out your cameras straight away. I think that's really it.
Yeah.
Give people time.
I think time can be the most valuable commodity. If you're on an expensive film production with a large crew, that time is really valuable. If you can engineer it so time isn't as valuable and so that you can take more time, that's probably the best reward you can get.
And I'd say don't be afraid to share a bit of your own story. So
yeah.
we would tell people about us, our background, so we're not just strangers completely. I think if they're asking someone to share their story, then you've got to be willing to do the same.
And I think just the final part of that is just not going in with any preconceived notions. Use it. This is documentary, and so it's a particular art form. But for me, that curiosity, that willingness to learn and understand and have your opinions changed and challenged, and that's all part of the artistic process for us. So the more you can just let it rip, the more you get out of it, definitely.
Yeah, and I love that too, because I think more than ever right now in the modern age, what people really need is to connect to one another and understand one another. And an artistic project like this, I think, the spirit of that, I think, can be both practical and and well, not impractical, but certainly something that's kind of harder to pin your finger exactly on the importance of it, but it's more emotional, I guess I'll say.
Mm.
But on a practical level, to get an effective story told, right? People have to
Mm,
trust you. They have to
mm,
feel like, and you're going to take care of them.
yep.
Yes.
And I think that's fantastic sound advice.
Mm,
Well, Matt and Rose, I really appreciate this. I just really want to stress again, this is a really phenomenal film, and if you are an artist making work about small communities, or you're in a small community making art, this film is going to speak to you on all kinds of levels. So thank you for your artistry, thank you for your work, and I really appreciate this.
yeah, great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, that was a fun chat.
Absolutely. It can be difficult to find resources for arts organizations, artists, and civic leaders looking to promote the arts in smaller communities. Small Town Big Arts is a podcast for those looking to boost the arts in rural and small town America. From the mountains of Kentucky to the Alaskan coast, each episode speaks with leaders in the field successfully navigating issues of fundraising, waning board engagement, local politics, and employee and volunteer retention. If you are in a community with less than 100,000 residents and the arts are important to you, find our monthly episodes by searching Small Town Big Arts.